Zara Mitchell had learned something across the months since the Tuesday in July that she had not expected the months to teach her. She had expected to learn about resilience. Everyone who knew about the Tuesday expected her to emerge from it having learned about resilience, as if resilience were the lesson that difficult things existed to produce, and as if the producing of it were sufficient compensation for the difficult thing. She had not learned about resilience. She had learned about architecture. Specifically, she had learned that the architecture of a life, the specific structure of the decisions and the relationships and the silences and the truths withheld, and the truths told that a person builds their daily existence inside of, was either sound or was not, and that the difference between sound and unsound was not visible from the outside, and was frequently not visible from inside either until the specific pressure that revealed the difference arrived. The Tuesday in July had been that pressure for her family. The article had been that pressure for the Mitchells and the Okafor simultaneously. And Eleanor's message, waiting on her phone on the evening that Robert had confessed and Diane had called, and the second article had been preparing itself somewhere in the specific machinery of a journalism operation that did not require her permission to proceed, was a specific pressure that was about to reveal what was underneath everything that had not yet been revealed. She had put the phone down. She had sat with Amara. She had slept. In the morning she had picked up the phone and called Eleanor. Eleanor had answered on the first ring. She had said she was glad Zara had called. She had said she wanted to finish what she had started on Saturday, and that she needed Zara to understand before she finished it that what she was about to say was something she had discussed with Charles. She had told him on Sunday that she had spoken to Zara, and what she had said, and what she intended to say next, and Charles had been quiet for a long time, and had then said she should say it. She had said that was the most important thing first, that Charles knew and had agreed that the saying was right. Zara had said she understood. Eleanor had said 30 years ago Charles Okafor and Robert Mitchell had been young men in Atlanta who had known each other and worked together and been friends in the specific way she had begun to describe on Saturday. She had said the friendship had ended over money, specifically over a decision Robert had made during a period when both men were struggling financially, and when Charles had trusted Robert with something that Robert had used a way that Charles had not given him permission to use. She had said Charles had been angry, had been the specific anger of a young man who has trusted someone completely and who has discovered that the trusting was not adequately reciprocated. She had said the anger had ended the friendship immediately and completely, and that Charles had carried the anger for longer than the anger was useful and had subsequently, in the specific way that people revise their understanding of things across decades, arrived at a more complicated position on what happened and on Robert's culpability and on his own response to it. She had said Charles had never reached out to Robert across 30 years, because reaching out had required revisiting something that was easier not to revisit, and because 30 years of distance had made the revisiting feel less urgent than it felt when the thing was fresh. She had said that the arrival of their children's relationship had made the revisiting both urgent and necessary, and that Charles had been sitting with how to do it since the driveway. She had said there was one more thing. Zara had said she was listening. Eleanor had said the money that Robert had used, the thing Charles had trusted him with, Robert had used it to come back to Diane, to buy the bus ticket and pay the first month's rent on the apartment he had moved into when he returned from the 3 months of leaving. The money Charles had given Robert in a moment of friendship had been the specific money that had made Robert's return to Diane possible. Eleanor had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said she thought Zara should know that. Zara had said she thought so too. She had sat with that information for 2 days. She had not told Daniel immediately, had needed the 2 days to understand what she was going to do with what the 2 days were producing before she brought Daniel into the producing of it. Daniel had given her the 2 days with a specific patient understanding of a man who has learned that the woman he loves processes things in her own time, and that the processing is always worth waiting for. On the second day, Zara had called her father. Robert had answered immediately. He had been answering immediately since the Tuesday when it come and said the 3 specific sorries. She had said she needed to tell him something, and that the something was going to be difficult, and that she needed him to receive it without deflecting or managing or applying specific interpretive charity to it, that people applied to information about themselves that is uncomfortable. He had said he would try. She had told him what Eleanor had told her. She had told him about Charles and the money and the bus ticket and the apartment, and the specific fact that the money his oldest friend had given him in a moment of genuine friendship had been the money he had used to return to the woman he had abandoned. Robert had been very still on the phone. She had felt the stillness through call in the specific way she had felt Daniel's stillness through calls. The quality of a person who has received something and who is inside the receiving of it rather than managing the reception. He had been quiet for a long time. Then he had said he had not known where the money came from. He had said this clearly, and Zara had believed him clearly because the saying of it had the specific quality of a true thing rather than the quality of a convenient thing. And she had by this point in her life developed sufficient experience of both to know the difference. He had said a mutual friend had told him there was money available for him if he wanted to come back, and that he had taken it without asking who it was from, because he had been 24 years old and desperate, and the not asking had felt less complicated than the asking. He had said he had spent 30 years not knowing. Zara had said she thought he should know now. He had said he thought so too. Then he had said he needed to make a call. Zara had said she knew. He had ended the call. Robert Mitchell had called Charles Okafor directly, not through the official channels, not through the protocol of calling the president's office, and leaving a message with a staff member and waiting for the appropriate return communication to be arranged. Directly, the number had come from Daniel, who had given it to Zara, who had given it to her father, because the giving of it had felt like the right thing, and because Zara Mitchell had always had a specific instinct for what the right thing was, even when the right thing was complicated, and even when it required her to be the specific kind of brave that nobody had explicitly asked her to be. Robert had called at 7 in the evening on a Thursday. Charles had answered. They had talked for 2 hours. Zara had not been on the call. She had not asked for a report of the call. She had simply known it had happened because Robert had called her afterward and had said he and Charles had spoken, and that the speaking had been the specific kind of conversation that two people have when they have 30 years of things to say and 2 hours to say them, and that the 2 hours had been sufficient for the beginning of something and insufficient for the whole of it, and that the beginning was what mattered. He had said Charles was a good man. Zara had said she had gathered that. Robert had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said he was proud of his daughter. He had said it in the specific tone of a man who is saying something he should have been saying for 22 years, and who knows it, and who is saying it now, because now is what is available. Zara had said she knew. He had said good night. She had said good night. She had put the phone down. She had looked at Amara. She had looked at Daniel. She had said her father, and his father had talked. Daniel had said he knew. Charles had told him. She had said, was it all right? Daniel had said it was the beginning of all right, and that beginning of all right was more than either of them had had yesterday. She had said that was enough for a Thursday. He had said it was more than enough. The second article had been published on Friday. It had been different from the first. Not the specific personal drama of the Tuesday in July in the library in the driveway, but the specific broader cultural conversation that the first article had generated, and that the journalist had identified as a more important story. The second article had been about what happened to young women when they were made vulnerable by the people who were supposed to protect them, and about the specific public response to Zara's story, which had been. The journalist had documented this carefully and with a specific professional rigor of someone who understands that feelings are not evidence, but that 100,000 feelings pointing in the same direction constitute a pattern worth examining. Overwhelmingly on Zara's side, and overwhelmingly critical of the decision her parents had made. The article had not named Robert and Diane by name, had referred to them as her family, and had treated their decision with the specific analytical distance of journalism that is interested in the pattern rather than the individuals. It had quoted extensively from the social media response. It had quoted 3 sociologists and a family therapist. It had said that Zara Mitchell's story had become, in the week since the first article, a specific cultural reference point for a conversation about the way that families respond to the vulnerability of young women, and about whose dignity is protected in those responses, and whose is not. It had ended with a paragraph about Amara, about the fact that a baby had been born into the situation, that the baby was healthy and present and entirely unbothered by the conversation happening around her existence, and that the baby's unbothered presence was perhaps the most clarifying element available, that whatever the adults in this story had done or not done, the baby had arrived and was here, and was the specific ongoing evidence that life continued producing itself regardless of the specific failures of the people responsible for providing it with a welcome. Keisha had come to see Zara on the Saturday after the second article. She had called first, had called on a Friday evening, and had said she needed to come and that she understood if Zara did not want to see her, and that she was going to come anyway and sit outside if Zara would not let her in because she had something she needed to say, and she had been not saying it for too long, and the not saying of it had been costing her something she could not afford to keep paying. Zara had said she could come. Keisha had arrived at 10 in the morning with the specific expression of a young woman who has spent the previous weeks understanding the full weight of something she set in motion, and who is carrying that weight with the specific visible effort of someone who has not yet learned how to put it down. She had sat across from Zara. She had said she was the one who had talked to the journalist. She had said it directly because she had decided that the saying of it directly was the minimum available honesty, and that the minimum available honesty was what the situation required. She had said she had not understood what she was doing when she did it, had not understood that the specific details she was sharing with a journalist she had met at a social event were the kind of details that would become the foundation of an article that would be read by 4 million people. She had said that not understanding was not an excuse. She had been old enough to understand that talking to a journalist about a private family situation was not a consequence-free activity, and that the not understanding was really the not examining, the specific failure to ask the question she should have asked, which was what happens if this is published, and she had not asked it, because not asking had been more comfortable than asking it. She had said she was sorry. She had said it the specific number of times that the specific weight of what she had done required. Not once, not performatively many times. 3 times. Each one meaning something slightly different from the others, and all of them together constituting something that was in the direction of adequate without quite reaching it. Zara had listened to all of it. She had been quiet for a long time. Then she had said she had a question. Keisha had said anything. Zara had said why. Not why had she talked to the journalist. She had understood that. Why had she told Zara's family about the pregnancy test in the first place? What had she thought was going to happen? Keisha had been quiet for a long time. Then she had said she had been jealous. She had said it in the specific, direct way of someone who has identified the true thing, and who has decided that the true thing is the only thing available. She had said she had always been a successful cousin, the one who was doing things right, and that Zara had always been the one who was doing things her own way and getting away with it, and that seeing the pregnancy test had produced in her the specific reaction of someone who has decided that the person doing things their own way should finally have to face a consequence for it. She had said she had not intended for the consequence to be what it became. Zara had said she knew. She had said the jealousy did not make it better, but it made it more honest than the alternative explanations, and that honest was something she could work with. Keisha had looked at her cousin, and had said she did not know how Zara was the way she was. Zara had said she had had a Tuesday in July to teach her. They had sat for a while longer. It was not repaired. It was the beginning of a repair that was going to take longer than a Saturday morning, and that required more from both of them than a Saturday morning conversation could produce. But it was the beginning, and the beginning was what was available. The public conversation had produced something that nobody in the story had anticipated, a nonprofit organization that worked with young women in housing crises, young women who had been made homeless by family decisions, by pregnancy, by the specific vulnerability of being young and female, and without adequate institutional support, had reached out to Zara through Daniel's office. They had said they wanted to know if she would be willing to speak publicly about her experience, not to perform the experience for an audience, to use the experience as a foundation for a specific kind of advocacy work that the organization had been doing for 7 years, and that Zara's story had suddenly given a public face to in a way that no amount of professional communications work could have produced. Zara had read the email 3 times. She had discussed it with Daniel and with Eleanor. Eleanor had become, across the months since the Saturday morning, the specific kind of presence in Zara's life that Zara had not expected to find in the First Lady of the country, and that she had found anyway, the warm, intelligent presence of a woman who had seen enough of the world to know which people were worth investing in, and who had decided that Zara was one of those people. Eleanor had said it was Zara's decision entirely, and that whatever she decided would be right, because Zara had the specific quality of judgment that made her decisions right, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest, and honest decisions produce honest outcomes, and honest outcomes were the best available. Zara had said yes to the organization. She had spoken at their annual conference 4 months after Amara's birth, not a prepared speech. She had written notes, had organized what she wanted to say with a specific organized efficiency that was her most natural mode. But the speaking itself had been the speaking of a person who had something real to say, and who said it in a specific, direct way that real things deserved to be said. She had talked about the Tuesday in July. She had talked about the 2 bags. She had talked about the library and the periodicals section, and the specific quality of sitting in a library with a dead phone and nowhere specific to go, and the very specific decision she had made in that library, which was not a dramatic decision, not the kind of decision that announces itself as significant in the moment of its making, just a quiet decision to keep going because the alternative to keeping going was not available, and because she had a child growing inside her, and the child was going to need her to be the kind of person who kept going. She had talked about what she had learned, not the resilience that everyone expected her to have learned, but the specific things she had actually learned, which was that vulnerability was not weakness, and that accepting help was not defeat, and that the people who loved you were sometimes the people who failed you most completely, and that both of those things being simultaneously true was one of the most difficult available facts about being human, and that it did not resolve neatly, and that the not resolving neatly was not a problem to be fixed, but a complexity to be inhabited honestly. She had talked about Amara. She had said her daughter had been born into a complicated world, and that complicated was not the same as unwelcoming, and that the difference between those two things was the work. She had said the work was worth doing. She had sat down. The room had been quiet for a moment. Then it had not been quiet. The nonprofit had created a fund in the weeks after the conference. They had named it the Two Bags Fund, after the 2 bags Zara had packed on the Tuesday morning, and it provided emergency housing support for young women, in exactly the situation Zara had been in. The fund had received more donations in its first week than the organization had received in any previous quarter. Zara had not asked for this. She had not managed it or directed it or applied the specific professional skill said she had been developing across the months of navigating everything her life had become to production of it. It had happened because she had spoken honestly in a room, and the room had responded in the specific way that rooms respond when they have heard something true that they needed to hear. She had looked at the fund's first week numbers and had felt something that she had not immediately had a name for, and that she had subsequently identified as a specific quality of arriving somewhere that you did not know you were heading for, but that you recognize immediately as the right place when you get there. She had not known on the Tuesday in July that the Tuesday in July was the beginning of this. She had simply packed 2 bags and walked out of a door, and the walking had led here. Diane Mitchell had asked to come and see Amara on a Wednesday in the 3rd month, not to see Zara, to see Amara. She had said this specifically and with the specific humility of a woman who understood that the asking needed to be specific and humble, and that claiming more access than she had earned was not something she was to do anymore. She had said she wanted to see her granddaughter if that was permitted, and that she understood if it was not yet permitted and would wait until it was. Zara had said she could come on Thursday. Diane had come at 11 in the morning with the specific, careful quality of a woman entering a space. She knows she has to earn, and who has decided that earning it requires behaving like someone who knows she has to earn it. She had looked at Amara, had stood over bassinet, and looked at her granddaughter with the expression that people produce when they are looking at something that makes the specific, complicated feelings they are carrying temporarily irrelevant, because what they're looking at is simply too present and too complete to share space with complexity. She had looked at Amara for a long time without saying anything. Then she had said she was beautiful. Zara had said she knew. Diane had said she looked like Zara as a baby. Zara had said she had not known that. Diane had said she had the same specific quality of looking at things. Fully present, fully attending, as if nothing in the field of vision was being missed. She had said Zara had always done that, even as a newborn, had looked at the world with the specific full attention of someone who was not going to miss anything. Zara had looked at her mother. She had said she did not know that about herself. Diane had said there was a great deal she had not told Zara that she intended to tell her if Zara was willing to hear it. Zara had said she was willing. Diane had sat down. She had begun. The conversation had lasted 4 hours. It had covered the 37 years and the pregnancy and the 3 months and Robert's return and the specific daily weight of building a life on top of something that had never been examined and the way that unexamined things grow in the dark and produce consequences that the people above them cannot see coming because they had been specifically not looking the direction where the consequences were developing. Diane had said she had known on the Tuesday morning in July that what she was doing was wrong, and that the knowing had made the doing of it worse, not better, because it had meant that the wrongness was chosen rather than accidental. She had said she had spent the month since the driveway sitting with that specific fact, that she had chosen wrongly while knowing it was wrong, and that the sitting with it had been the most useful and the most painful thing she had done in those months, and that she was not done sitting with it, but that the sitting had produced something, It had produced a specific, honest understanding that the life she had built on the foundation of the unexamined thing had been producing in her a specific kind of person. Someone who prioritized the maintenance of the image over the truth of the experience, who had confused respectability with goodness, who had mistaken the absence of visible failure for the presence of genuine virtue. She had said she did not want to be that person anymore, and that the one was not the same as having changed, and that she understood the difference, and that the difference was what she was working on. Zara had listened to all 4 hours. She had asked questions when the questions were available. She had said what she needed to say when saying was the right response, and had been quiet when quiet was the right response, and had managed the 4 hours with a specific intelligent warmth that had always been her most natural quality, and at the Tuesday in July and everything that followed it had confirmed rather than diminished. At the end, Diane had held Amara for a long time. Amara had been entirely unbothered by the way of the conversation that had preceded the holding, which was, Zara had thought, the most clarifying thing about babies, that they received you without the specific encumbrance of your history, and required only the present and the warmth and the being there, which was perhaps the most useful model available for how the people in this story were going to need to learn to receive each other going forward. The formal meeting between the Mitchell family and the Okafor family had been arranged for a Sunday in the 5th month, not at the residence, at a restaurant in Atlanta that Charles had chosen specifically because it was warm and private and in the city where both families had built their lives, and because the choosing of Atlanta rather than Washington had been a specific signal that Charles intended to send, which was that this meeting was between families rather than between the president's family and the Mitchells, and that the distinction mattered to him. Robert and Diane had arrived first, had been there when Charles and Eleanor walked in, had stood when Charles and Eleanor walked in, and the standing had been the specific standing of two people who understand the weight of a moment and who had decided that the weight deserves the standing. Charles had looked at Robert across the restaurant for a moment. 30 years. The specific distance of 30 years visible in both faces, and also the specific quality of two men who had spoken on the phone for 2 hours on a Thursday evening, and who had said things in those 2 hours that the 30 years had needed to be said, and that had produced, in the saying, the beginning of something that neither of them had known was still available. Charles had crossed to Robert. He had extended his hand. Robert had taken it. Eleanor had said something to Diane in a low voice, and Diane had nodded, and something had passed between them. That was a specific female version of what had just passed between the men, warm and direct and entirely unperformed. They had all sat down. Daniel had arrived with Zara and Amara 10 minutes later. The restaurant had been warm. The food had been good. The conversation had been the specific kind of conversation that happens when people who have a great deal of history have decided to begin something new on top of the history, without pretending the history is not there and without allowing the history to be the only available subject. It had covered practical things and personal things, and the things that needed to be covered. It had lasted 3 hours. Nobody had wanted to leave when the 3 hours ended. They had stayed for another hour. When they finally left the restaurant into the Atlanta evening, the specific warm quality of an Atlanta evening in the month when the heat has begun to ease and the city produces a particular golden light of late afternoon, Zara had stood on the sidewalk with Mara and had looked at both sets of parents talking, and had thought about the Tuesday in July, and about the library, and about the 2 bags, and about Eleanor on a Saturday morning, and about her father's 3 specific sorries, and about Diane's 4-hour conversation, and about Amara at 4:23 on a Thursday morning, and about the 2 bags fund, and about the conference, and about Keisha's Saturday morning, and about Charles and Robert on the phone for 2 hours, and had understood that the story that had started on a Tuesday in July with the worst available version of what family could do had arrived here, on an Atlanta sidewalk, on an evening in the 5th month with the best available version of what people could do when they decided that the truth was worth the cost of the telling. It was not a perfect arrival. The 37 years were still the 37 years. The Tuesday in July was still the Tuesday in July. The things that had been done were still the things that had been done, and would remain the things that had been done regardless of what happened afterward, because that was the specific nature of things that had been done. They did not unhappen. They simply became part of the architecture of what came next, and what came next was either built on them honestly or was not built honestly at all. Zara Mitchell had always been interested in the honest version. She had been interested in it on the Tuesday in July, when she had walked out of a door with 2 bags, and had chosen to keep going rather than to stop, because stopping was not available. She had been interested in it in the library when she had said her phone needed 10 more minutes to charge. She had been interested in it at 4:23 on a Thursday morning, when she had looked at Amara and had understood something total about what the keeping going had been for. She was interested in it now, standing on an Atlanta sidewalk, watching the people who had failed her and the people who had not failed her and the people who had done both simultaneously find each other across the distance of everything that had happened and begin the specific slow work of building something on the honest foundation that the truth had finally provided. Daniel had come to stand beside her. He had looked at both sets of parents. He had said it was something. She had said it was the beginning of something. He had said that was what he had said. She had said no. He had said it was something. She had said it was the beginning of something, and that the distinction mattered. He had looked at her with the expression he wore when she had said something that confirmed what he already knew about her, which was the same expression he had worn in the coffee shop when she had said that explained the car, and that had been for both of them the moment when what was between them became something they were both actively choosing. She had looked at him. She had said it was going to take a long time. He had said he had time. She had said she knew. She had meant it. She had always meant it when she said she knew things. That was a specific quality of Zara Mitchell that the Tuesday in July had not produced but had revealed. That she was a woman who paid attention, and who knew things, and who said what she knew, and who kept going when the keeping going was the only available option, and who had discovered across the months of everything the story contained that the keeping going was almost always the only available option, and that almost always was often enough. Amara was in her arms. The Atlanta evening was warm around them. The story was not finished. Stories like this were never finished. They simply reached a point where the people inside them had enough of the truth to build with and began the building. They had the truth now. All of it. The full, complicated, honest, difficult, necessary truth of everything that had happened and why and what it had cost and what it had produced. They were going to build with it. That was what you did. That was what people who paid attention and said what they knew and kept going did. They built. Zara Mitchell had always known how to build. She had simply been waiting for the right foundation. She had it now. She had always been going to have it. The Tuesday in July had simply been the beginning of the finding.